In this episode of the Choose Hard podcast, I'm going to show you what research shows determines your self-esteem and self-worth as a human being. And then I'm going to give you a simple 4-step system to ensure that you are improving your self-worth and self-esteem so you can live a more successful and a more fulfilling and happy life. Welcome to the Choose Hard podcast. I am your host, Cody McBroom. I am a trainer, I am a sports nutritionist, and I am the founder of TailoredCoachingMethod, a world-renowned online fitness and nutrition coaching company. If you are new here, thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in and listening. This podcast is all about fitness, nutrition, and mindset. Everything you need in order to choose hard on a daily basis, develop your character, grow as an individual, and just live a better life. That's what this is all about. Free value to make sure that you do the hard things that lead you to an easy life. If you're a returning listener, thank you for coming back. Thank you for listening, and respect. Congratulations. You're about to grow again. Today's podcast episode is something that I've actually never discussed. I shouldn't say I've never discussed, but I've never dove into on this level. So this is a topic that I have not ever dedicated a single piece of content to. And that topic, that category is self-worth specifically. And this kind of came about because, one, I think it's evident that today's world, we are at an all-time low of self-worth. I mean, it's very, very apparent that depression, anxiety, stress, overwhelm, lack of identity, lack of standards, work ethic, everything is just dropped through the floor. I don't think that's anybody, that won't take anybody by surprise, but self-worth is something that is going to be dropping lower and lower and has already dropped lower and lower for most people because of the way things are going in the world with regards to these other aspects. So as we, have a lower work ethic, as we put in less effort, as we don't work as hard, our self-worth drops. As we worry more about what other people think, our self-worth drops, right? As we have a lack of clarity or a blurred sense of identity and standards in our life and values, our self-worth drops. So it's a very, very obvious thing, but it's something that's not discussed enough. And I want to dive deep into it, specifically with what research shows to be the truth, the answer, the reason for this, as well as what research has provided us with to create a solution and a pathway. So I'm actually going to give you a 4-step process to improving your self-worth by the end of this podcast. Now, this also, I want to give a shout out to the author of this book, because I've been reading this book and it is phenomenal. I actually am reading and listening. So I have it on my phone, on my Spotify right here. So I know the title exactly. And that is The First Rule of Mastery: Stop Worrying About What People Think of You by Michael Gervais. I have no idea. He has a podcast as well. In fact, I'm going to go to his podcast and shout that out too, because his podcast is great. And he's had it for a while. He is like a performance specialist coach, Finding Mastery. That is his podcast. So really, really good book. I purchased it a while back and I never dug into it. And if you're anything like me, or you just have ADHD and you haven't figured out how to, stick to the book better and actually get through it and read it and stay focused, try listening and reading. I think I've mentioned that in the podcast as a tip, but it is such a good hack for anybody who has ADHD or struggles with distractions in general, and I do have ADHD, so I take any hacks I can get to make sure that I am staying productive, I'm staying focused, staying on task, and I'm learning, right? And so I read as I'm listening to them talk at like 1.5 speed, which helps me read faster and I can absorb the information better. So anyway, self-worth is the topic we're going to dive into today. Okay. So the first thing is, the definition of this, like what is self-worth? If we really look at self-worth, and self-worth stems from self-esteem, and self-esteem can be looked at in different ways. And sometimes people, I find that a lot of people avoid using this word because sometimes it can almost be, they actually did a study on this as well as I was doing my research for this episode, where they looked at the differences of basically self-esteem, high levels of self-esteem and narcissism, which is kind of crazy to think about. But if you have a high level of self-esteem, for some people who, especially those who have low self-esteem and tend to point the finger and blame, we can look at that as and judge that person with high self-esteem and call them a narcissist, call them cocky or arrogant because they have a high regards for themselves, which sounds kind of cocky and arrogant, right? And that's why they did this study, but it's different, right? A high level of self-esteem is more so attached to your values and your beliefs and your standards of life and what you think is right and wrong, versus narcissism and cockiness and arrogance is like literally just you're not wrong, everybody else is wrong, and you actually thrive and feel better when not only are you right, but others are wrong. So even if you're not right, you will actually force and change the story to make others wrong so that you feel better about not being right, which is crazy to say, but like that's literally what it is. So when we look at self-esteem, the definition I kind of took from, Webster, but also just tweaked it a little bit, is self-esteem is your confidence in your own worth or abilities. It's somewhat synonymous to self-respect. When I say tweak it, I really just adjusted it to make it more readable and understandable, not so literal. But self-esteem is your confidence in your worth, your own worth and abilities. It's somewhat synonymous with self-respect. And that's why I love this, because we talk a lot about self-respect. And part of the journey through the coaching process with us is this self-transformation, right? The self-formation we talk about. And it's like you gain self-control, which helps you develop self-discipline, which leads to actions that get results. And those results take you to self-belief. And once you have self-belief, you can begin to develop self-respect because you have this high level of self-esteem and confidence. So when we look at self-esteem, it is your confidence in your own worth, self-worth, and your abilities as a person. And it is somewhat synonymous to self-respect in the sense that you really don't have one without the other. You accomplish self-respect once you have a high level of self-worth or self-esteem, so on and so forth, okay? So that being said, how to improve self-esteem. That's really what we're diving into today. And there's 4 things we need to figure out and consider and really look at. And so we're going to get into these all individually. But when you're thinking about self-worth after this podcast and you're trying to remember, how do I improve my self-worth? How do I focus on developing a greater sense of self-worth and improving my self-esteem? I want you to think of I.D.D. I.D.D. That's it, right? I.D. Think of I.D., your identity, right? And part of your identity is going to be built off of I.D.D. And that's what this, and I like using acronyms or frameworks like this so that it just clicks and remembers, right? The last one was actually an S, but I just changed it to a D just so it was more memorable. I.D.D.S. isn't as memorable. So identify personal contingencies, diversify sources of self-worth, develop non-contingent self-esteem, and determine and achieve intrinsic goals. So internal goals, internally motivated or meaningful goals. So identify personal contingencies, diversify sources of self-worth, and develop non-contingent self-esteem. That is how you improve your self-esteem. It's how you improve your self-worth. But we're going to get into all of it. So before we do, we're going to look at research. So I want to look at research in this. And again, this podcast, my goal with this podcast is first to get people understanding where self-worth comes from and why it's so important to have a high level of self-worth. Ultimately, if we want to have a high regards for ourselves, if we want to live a meaningful life, a happy life, if we want to be satisfied with life, we need to have a high level of self-worth, because ultimately, I heard this really good quote. It was from Chris Williamson of Modern Wisdom. He said that it's something to the effect of, it's crazy to know that we chase, in the pursuit of chasing the thing we want, we sacrifice the thing we want. And what he's talking about is in the pursuit of chasing success, which you ultimately think is going to give you happiness, you sacrifice your happiness along the way. And so you have no happiness because you're sacrificing it to achieve this status or level of success that hopefully gives you the happiness that you didn't realize you already had, right? And if you read the book, The Alchemist, is all about this. Like, the boy goes on this journey looking for this treasure, and the treasure was actually back at home. So he takes a journey around the world, basically, all to just find that the treasure was right where he started. And it's to say that, look around you. You have value in your life right now. And if you see that value, you're going to be happier and you're going to have a greater sense of self-worth. So I want people to understand that. And then I want to show people how we can accomplish a greater sense of self-worth. And again, that's going to come from identifying personal contingencies, which I'm going to show you what are, diversifying sources of self-worth, so you're not relying on one single source to provide you with self-worth. You're developing non-contingent things to create self-esteem and self-worth. And then you're determining and achieving intrinsic goals, not just extrinsic, external goals, things that don't really matter. They're more materialistic, if you will, status focused, okay? Now, I want to touch on the research because I just typically like to dive into the research. I think the research is a good way for us to have proof going into anything we discuss, right? So when we think about something like fat loss, we want to have proof of concept around energy balance, metabolism, cardio, energy expenditure, stuff like that, right? I treat everything else the same way. I want to have research to back up what I'm practicing, what I'm teaching, what I'm thinking, what I'm coaching. And so the study I chose, there was a handful on, and probably more, but there was a handful that I went through on self-worth. And the one I chose is called Contingencies of Self-Worth. And it's by Jennifer Crocker and Connie T. Wolf. It's back from 2001, and it presents a model emphasizing the domains in which individuals base their self-esteem, known as contingencies of self-worth. Right? So these are the things that your self-worth is contingent on, is what it's getting at. And they believe that there are specific contingencies that most people have. This is very, synonymous with everybody. This is very common across all people that they put through these research studies, is that everybody kind of has these, they call it domains, and I'm going to get into these domains, but everybody has contingencies in which they determine their self-worth. So they only have self-worth if blank. They only have self-worth if they have enough blank. They only have self-worth if they accomplish blank. They only have self-worth if so-and-so thinks blank of me, right? All of which are wrong, obviously, but that's the point, is first identifying this, right? And so that's why the first thing was identify personal contingencies. So looking at the study, just doing an overview, the objective for them was to explore how self-esteem is influenced by successes and failures in domains where individuals have staked their self-worth. The methodology was that the authors reviewed existing literature to develop their model, focusing on how self-esteem fluctuates based on personal contingencies. So they went through all the research on self-esteem and self-worth, and then they started actually creating a rubric, if you will, and they just were looking for, how does self-esteem go up and down when we categorize these variables, and these variables were the contingencies. When these contingencies are in place, what happens with people's self-worth? The findings. The model suggests that individuals' self-esteem rises and falls in response to outcomes in specific domains they deem important. It highlights the role of contingencies of self-worth in affect, cognition, behavior regulation, social issues, and psychological vulnerabilities like depression. So self-worth is dramatically impacted based on these contingencies, is essentially what they said. And the conclusion was that understanding contingencies of self-worth provides insights into self-esteem's role in various psychological processes and social problems. The authors propose that some individuals may possess non-contingent self-esteem, which is less susceptible to fluctuations based on external outcomes. And that's exactly why I want to help you figure out what your non-contingent domains are for you personally, listening to this, to help you develop more self-worth. What can we outline that is, creates a higher regard of self-esteem and self-worth, because your self-worth is not contingent on the domains that they found to be most important in other individuals. And I will categorize this as some of these domains were just negative impacts in general. If blank person is basing their self-worth and value on blank contingency, for lack of better terms, they're screwed. They're basically, it's a no-sum game. They're just not going to win. It's not going to work out. That's never going to provide the self-worth and value that you want. And the reason is pretty simple. Some of the factors are uncontrollable. Some of the factors are opinion-based, not fact-based. Some of the factors rely on other individuals or external factors you are not in control of, again. And I'm going to go over that at the end when we go through the 4 steps to help you fix this. But some of them actually did provide a greater level of self-worth. And it's in a way, it is contingent on those factors, but there's flexibility and a dynamic nature to that contingency or that domain that allows them more freedom, and it creates more diversity. So I'm going to get into that, but this is really, really, really important, okay? Now, the domains they studied for this, these are the domains that, or the contingencies, if you will. People's contingencies were all regarded in these domains, okay? And so, for example, if, approval is the first one. So approval is the domain. Well, approval in general isn't the thing, because you could not get my approval and you could not give a shit. You're like, I don't care. It doesn't matter that you don't approve of me or my actions. But if your father or your mother or your husband or your wife or your coach or whatever your client is, if somebody important to you in somebody that like, there's this one person that their approval does matter and dictates too much in your life. The problem with that is that, so first of all, that's the contingency. Approval is the domain, and I'm overly explaining this because I really want it to click in your head and your mind so that you can take action and change. Approval is the domain. Susie, right, or husband or coach or influencer or teacher or somebody, like the person itself, that's the contingency. Approval is the domain, and this person is the contingency, okay? Or this group. That's huge, especially in youth. Does this group approve of me? We see this especially true in the world because it's so divided in these like cliques and these groups. It's pretty crazy. And there's so much predicated on approval. People will dramatically change who they are. They change their identity. They change their life goals. They change their life actions. They change their environment. They change how they act, how they show up, their attitudes, everything based on whether or not a specific social group approves of them, right? So approval is the domain. The group or the person is the contingency. So I hope that makes sense. And this is so unbelievably important because we have to be able to look at these domains and the contingencies we have within them and determine what gives this thing, person, level of approval, domain, contingency, the right to determine my self-worth. Can we even validate it? Right? If somebody says they don't approve of me, why is that? Is it because of something actually truly wrong? Am I doing something wrong? Or is it because of a judgment, an opinion they have, or an insecurity they have? So they're projecting their insecurity onto us by putting us down and not approving of us so they feel better about themselves. And now we have lower self-worth because of that? That doesn't make sense. That's not okay. We can't do that. That's not how it works. And this is why we have to really, really assess these things. The other aspect is that we project our own insecurities and emotions. So everybody listening to this is going to get this analogy. You or example, you send a text and somebody just sends you back K or likes the message. This is even better. They just like the message. And you're like, damn, they got an issue? Is everything okay? And you get this sense of disapproval. But maybe they're just busy. Maybe they're driving, they're trying to avoid it. Or maybe they're literally talking to text in their dashboard, right? They're like, Siri, like this message. And that's what it does. You know what I mean? Like, who knows? Like, we cannot determine our self-worth or lower our own happiness and value based on the approval of others, okay? So these domains, there is 7 of them. Approval, physical appearance, outperforming others, academic competence, family love and support, being a virtuous or moral person, and religious faith or God's love. These are the 7 studied domains that were in this research study, as well as what they were when they extrapolated from all these other research. These are the categories that they kept getting back. And basically everybody in the studies and in the studies they looked at could be broken down into these. Like when they saw fluctuations in their self-esteem and self-worth, it was based on one of these domains. The contingencies within that fluctuated their self-esteem and self-worth were within these 7 domains, one of, if not multiple. And so just to go through them all real quick, approval is going to be the approval of others and or a social group. Like I mentioned before, that was the one I kind of started with as an example. Physical appearance is going to be obviously your physical appearance. Now that can be the physical appearance based on your role. This can be misconstrued too, because in some ways it's not about, and I'm going to get into this more at the end when it's about application, but if you've been a longtime listener, or if you've been following me for a while, I've said multiple times that trainers need to be fit. Trainers need to look like trainers. If you're a strength coach, if you're a trainer, if you're a health coach, a nutritionist, and you are helping people with their health, you better be healthy. If you are helping people lose weight, you better be lean. If you are helping people get stronger, you better be pretty strong yourself. You don't need to be the strongest guy in the world, guy or gal. You don't need to be the leanest guy or gal in the world. You just need to be relatively healthy and relatively lean. You need to be like approval on your own standards, right? And this is more of a moral code because you took on a responsibility, right? Now, for everybody else, you do not need the approval of others to be the way you are, right? Like if there's one good thing that can come out of body positivity, that's it, is just accepting where you're at. Now, the problem with most body positivity things or gurus or people, influencers out there, is that they tell you to accept where you're at and not change it. Don't change where you're at because you should love yourself. No, you should accept where you're at and you shouldn't shame yourself, but then you should change yourself, because if you're overweight, you're unhealthy, right? And so I say this because with physical appearance, there's an aspect that you should focus on your own standards in physical appearance and approval, not the approval of others, not how lean do they think I need to be, how lean do I need to be, not how healthy they think I need to be, how healthy do I need to be, how healthy do I want to be, how lean do I want to be, how do I want to live in this body, right? So approval, physical appearance, outperforming others is going to be, again, a no-sum game, because now you're basing it off of negative aspects for them, because if I outperform others, that's good for me, bad for them. There's a competitive nature in life that is good, because if I can correlate winning and competing with me getting better, me accomplishing my goal, that's good. But in this research, a lot of this is outperforming others, meaning I want them to lose so that I'm highlighted. That's ridiculous, right? That's not going to help people develop self-esteem. It's actually a very empty level of fulfillment. There is no fulfillment. It's a very empty sense of accomplishment. Academic competence, this is you're basing your self-worth off of your test scores, off the grades you get, off of how your teachers help you, how many certifications you have, so on and so forth. And, the reality is again, it's just not, this is a completely different discussion, but I think it's no common, it's not a uncommon thought to say that the public school system is probably not the best anymore, and a good way to think of that too is I heard this the other day and I was like, dang, I never thought about it like that. In high school, you have to learn like Spanish or sign language, something like that. I don't know about you, but I don't remember anything. I took Spanish 2 years in a row. Didn't get a good grade, but nonetheless, I don't remember any of it at all. So algebra, I'd have to really sit there and figure out how to do algebra. If anybody took calculus, do you remember? So I say that because the grade I got in algebra didn't determine my self-worth or value, because it didn't do anything for me to create self-worth and value in my life. It didn't provide meaning in my life. So, academic competence is not going to provide you with anything, because ultimately it's an empty achievement or goal based on a system that, is arguably not correct. But even then, it's a system that's not yours. So you can't base your value and worth off of a system that's not yours. Family love and support. This is one that I think has a good and a bad side, but family love and support is just being, your worth is based on your family love and support. And I'm going to talk about this later, but finding the proof and finding the facts, because if, you grew up or currently have a troubled family and there's evidence of that, you can't base your self-worth off of the love and support of a family that is not, it's not a good place. It's not a good person. Like you said, of people, it sounds really rough, and I'm not really in a place to discuss this kind of thing. I'm not a family therapist or anything, but you get the point. You can't base your self-love, worth, value, and esteem off of the love and value others are giving you if those other people don't also have their own self-worth and value at a high level, right? I hope that makes sense for people. But on the flip side, there's a lot of very, very happy, meaningful, passionate, loving, supporting families, and that can add to your self-worth because that's meaningful to you. So if their love is meaningful to you because you aspire to be someone who is similar to your parents or your family, whatever, then I think there is some positives in that, right? Being a virtuous or moral person. This is probably the last two tend to be in the research shown as the most beneficial and the most likely to have a wide range of dynamic and flexible, a lot of flexibility within it so that you can accomplish a higher level of self-worth, value, and esteem if you are focused on being a virtuous and moral person. And the reason for that is because you are developing, you cannot become, in your head, you cannot become a virtuous or moral person if you are not living by a moral code, which means that you have standards in your life. You cannot develop and become a virtuous person if you don't have virtues and core values in your life. those provide meaning that are non-extrinsic, non-materialistic, non-status related, which is a really good thing. And also you are creating meaning in other people's life, because everything you do in order to become more of a moral and virtuous person, 99% of the time is going to be involving helping others and growth and development as a human. So this is one that I do think helps a lot. And when we attach our self-esteem more closely to becoming a virtuous or moral person, it's going to be better off, because there's a lot of range in this. And also there's no cap to it. There's no define, like, what is a virtuous person? What is a moral person? The only way you can actually define it by like a one-word statement or a definitive word or explanation is to say that it's a good human being. That's it. So it's a great way, because the bar is just up. It's not like a set thing. It's just better than you are right now. And it's a constant, and it's a continuous process. And when you have a continuous process that is leading to more growth, you are going to have a higher and higher level of self-esteem and self-worth. And then the last one is religious faith and God's love. And this is also very, very synonymous with being a virtuous or a moral person, because at the end of the day, it's a bar that really can't be met, and it's not supposed to be. It's just being better. That's why, there's a lot of talk about grace inside of having faith, because being a virtuous person, being a moral person, having religious faith, or accomplishing God's love, all those things are really just a continuous journey that you can reflect. Failing and doing the wrong thing isn't always, like, there's limits to this, obviously, but doing, screwing up every once in a while or not being your best it's acceptable. You have grace for that. You are forgiven, and then you can get better because of it, because you're learning and then you grow. In fact, one of the best ways to become more virtuous and moral is to fail, learn, and then use the lesson you learn from failure to succeed. Because wisdom is basically knowledge from what you have learned through failures. If you read any kind of Stoic quote or parable, proverb, things like that, it is almost always going to be based on things that you should avoid. Avoid this, don't do this, like skip this, like try to avoid this and stop this, because it is based on, I failed, here's the lesson, avoid this at all costs now, so you don't have to learn the hard way too, okay? So approval, physical appearance, outperforming others, academic competence, family love and support, being a virtuous person or moral person, and religious faith or God's love. So those are the study domains. Now, again, we're going to, summarize these domains, and we're going to summarize the study, and then we're going to, go over what does this mean, and then just practically apply it with 4 simple steps. So the summary is pretty simple. And first, let's define it again. Self-esteem is your confidence in your own worth or abilities, and it can be synonymous and really parallel with self-respect. Self-esteem, and this is the summary of the what I boiled that study and everything into in a couple quick things, statements. Self-esteem lies in what people believe they need to be or do to have worth as a person. These contingencies of self-worth are both sources of motivation and areas of psychological vulnerability. Meaning, if you have psychological vulnerability because you have a contingency for your self-worth, then that is a very vulnerable place to be in, because you are going to lead to a place of anxiety, depression, stress, overwhelm, low self-worth. If we want a high sense of self-esteem, a high sense of self-worth, self-love, self-acceptance, self-respect, we cannot have predefined contingencies on what gives us that. We are going to be chasing things to create self-worth that are extrinsic to what matters to us, extrinsic from the inside. We need intrinsic morals, values, standards, goals that we can chase and become better from, and in the process of becoming better, reflect and then gather our self-esteem from these non-contingent areas of life. Getting better means I'm a good person. It means I'm constantly chasing improvement. It's not, I got an A on this test, I made this much on my paycheck, I have this many followers, I lost this much weight. Those things don't define you, and therefore they will not give you self-worth and self-value. And that's why a lot of times when people chase weight loss on the scale and they finally hit that number and they're like, oh, I'm still not happy, they're shocked. But the reality is if you would have reflected along the way and been more focused on, yes, losing weight and getting to your goal, but more focused on the process that led you there and extrapolating all the things you learned along the way, the person you became along the way, the values you gathered, the standards you set for yourself, The proof you have of accomplishing goals and taking actions beyond what you used to believe you could do, that's what creates a higher level of self-worth. That's what provides confidence. This is a shocking fact, but the risk of committing suicide dramatically increases after gastric surgery. So I believe it's gastric surgery. It's a weight loss surgery, the band. When the gastric sleeve is put on, there is, obviously a lot is going on physiologically, but essentially when we have this weight loss surgery and we have a gastric sleeve put on, what we're doing is shrinking the stomach, right? And so we have less room for food. So it's not only like you don't really want to eat because you're not hungry because those signals aren't being sent to your brain, but you literally can't because you can't put any more food in there, right? And this is why weight loss is accomplished. It forces you into a calorie deficit, literally. The problem is that we take people who have had years and years, potentially decades and decades of using food as a coping mechanism, and we remove their ability to eat it. So what we also did, yes, they lost weight, maybe got healthier because of it, but what we also did is we removed their coping mechanism for stress, anxiety, overwhelm, depression, sadness, anger, and now they don't know how to cope. And so really think about this. If people who get gastric sleeve surgery, shrinking their stomach, being able to eat less, are more likely to commit suicide later on in life, it's likely, there's no definitive answer here, but it's very likely that the reason for this is because they have essentially been forced to remove their coping mechanism. Their coping mechanism for stress and overwhelm and emotional states of being has been removed, and they don't know how to cope with the feelings they're having. But if we diet and we train and we do cardio and we slowly lose weight, over time, we literally develop new coping mechanisms that help us create endorphins for happiness. They help us create coping mechanism for sadness and for emotional states that we are not ready to handle. Because you're still gonna screw up and overeat during the process of dieting. That's part of it. You're gonna screw up and you're gonna learn. But over months and months and months and months of trying to lose weight, you will eventually have new coping strategies because you learn new habits, new practices, new tools, you got accountability. But somebody with a gastric sleeve is basically, we're just ripping those coping strategies right away. I found that study, I find that fact, and that statistic just so crazy. And it's so obvious why this is just, people don't zoom out and think of why you should not get weight loss surgery. This is why. There's more to weight loss than just losing weight. Weight loss is a journey that provides you with traits, characteristics, coping mechanisms, tools, practices, habits, hacks, life strategies, so much that leads to not just success, but new ways of dealing with the stresses that life's going to throw at you. And if somebody doesn't have anything but food in order to deal with life and the stress that comes along with it, and you remove that from them, what do you expect to happen? All right, I'm going to get off my soapbox because it's a touchy subject, but it just hits me hard. So my summary, that was supposed to be quick. These contingencies of self-worth are both sources of motivation and areas of vulnerability. And I just explained why these are psychological vulnerabilities in a very extreme way. But in domains of contingent self-worth, people pursue self-esteem by attempting to validate their abilities and qualities. This pursuit of self-esteem has cost to learning, relationships, autonomy, self-regulation, in both mental and physical health. So we need to create change. So what's this mean? It means we need to find a different way of achieving and possessing higher levels of self-esteem, self-worth, and self-respect. Ways that don't rely on other people, ways that don't rely on potential uncontrollable factors, and ways that don't rely on potentially non-factual opinions, okay? We need to rely on facts, proof, and we need to find a way that we can essentially define what leads to having a greater sense of self-worth, okay? And so if we look at that list of 7 and we kind of expand it, there's even more things that can impact your self-esteem and self-worth that you need to be aware of, okay? And so I'm going to read these kind of slow because just in case you can write them down. If you're driving, don't stop. Well, you can stop if you want, but don't try to write and drive. Core beliefs and values, thoughts and feelings, emotions and mental well-being, experiences and interactions with others, relationships, both past and present, health and physical fitness, career and profession, activities and hobbies, community and social status, financial position, physical appearance, and childhood experiences. So on top of the 7 that I listed before, which were approval, physical appearance, outperforming others, academic competence, family love and support, being a virtuous or moral person, and religious faith or God's love, which are the primary domains. Some of these other categories that I listed fit into those domains. And also, these are the most common of all. There is just an expanded list that I wanted to put here because there's a lot of things that can impact our self-esteem and self-worth. Okay, so the 4 steps are really simple here. So the first one, I said them at the very beginning. And so the first one is identify personal contingencies. In order to identify your personal contingencies, I think like I said, there's these domains, and you can start looking through these domains. If you're a very self-aware person, you have a lot of practice with coaching and therapy or mindset work, then you could definitely just take those domains and just start reading into it and really journaling and meditating and trying to figure out where within these domains do you find the contingencies in your life. But you can also just ask yourself these 4 questions, okay? So questions to ask yourself in order to identify your personal contingencies. Number 1, how much do you like, respect, and value yourself? That is a hard one to answer, but you need to answer it. Which words would you use to describe yourself to a stranger? When you self-reflect and think about yourself, are your thoughts generally positive, negative, or somewhere in between? And do you believe you are worthy of others' love, respect, and consideration? So, most important part about this, right? Now that we've identified personal contingencies through asking yourself these questions, how much do you like yourself, basically? Like, respect, or value yourself? How would you describe yourself to a stranger? When you reflect, are your thoughts about yourself generally positive, negative, or somewhere in between? And do you believe you are worthy of others' love, respect, and consideration? We need to move into step 2, which is to develop non-contingent self-esteem. Okay. And so this is where we create proof. We need to develop new ways that determine our self-worth, because based on those questions, you're most likely fitting into the categories of some of these contingencies that lie within these domains that are determining your self-worth. And whether you know it's right or wrong, right? We can sit here and say, nah, like that's not okay I can't determine my value and self-worth based on the opinions of others or the approval of others, but you do it. So if you're doing it, that's the problem. If you generally feel less worthy when somebody doesn't approve of you, that's a bad sign. You can respect somebody's opinion. You can't let that dictate. You can be upset. They can be like, man, I really wish that they did approve me, but you cannot let it dictate your self-worth. Create proof, okay? So number 1, with all these questions, the answer needs to be hell yes. Like we want to seek a hell yes, okay? So if anything was not a hell yes in any of those 4 questions, you need to ask yourself why without judgment. So why are you not answering hell yes? And when I say hell yes, think about it like this. How much do you like, respect, and value yourself? Hell yes, a lot. Which words would you use to describe yourself to a stranger? Hell yes isn't a good description of yourself, but you get the point. When you reflect and think about yourself, thoughts, are they generally positive, negative, or somewhere in between? Positive. And I would say hella positive, let's say. Do you believe you are worthy of others? Hell yes, right? So it's hell yes is a generalized vibe, let's say, to answer these questions. Then you have to answer them. And if they're not a hell yes, if they're not a very positive answer, you need to ask yourself why without judging yourself, because it's very normal. Then you need to remove the false narrative and contingency that you are placing on yourself worth. And you need to go create proof by getting the result that will create more self-worth. Okay. So if we remove the false narrative, which would be like, my physical appearance needs to be this way. Why? Because this person believes that, or this group of people only accept those who look like this, or this person on social media that I follow says that you need to be this way. You need to remove that statement, that fact, that opinion, and that false narrative in your head, and you need to then go create the proof. And the proof is going to be what you think, because maybe it's somewhere in between, right? Maybe you are 40 pounds overweight and you're feeling judged and you are lowering your self-worth based on the opinions of others and how lean you should be, but you also don't agree with their opinion. But you also don't think you should live 40 pounds heavier. Okay, we'll meet in the middle. Remove the false narrative and really figure out what matters to you, and then go create the proof. Because what I don't want people to do is remove all the false narratives and then not go do the work to create what is actually going to give them self-worth or value. Right? There's 2 sides of this. There's the side of this that gives you grace and it feels good and we're like showing ourselves love. And then there's the side that's like, get busy and get to work. Don't make excuses, okay? So that's step two. Step 3 is going to be diversifying sources of self-worth. We can't rely on solely one domain, right? And so remember the domains: approval, physical appearance, outperforming others, academic competence, value, love, and support, being a virtuous and moral person, religious faith, or God's love. If we look at all 7 of these and you're all in on approval, everything about your self-worth is based on the approval of others, that's an issue. If everything is based on being a virtuous person, that's an issue, right? Because your virtue signaling or your definition of moral might not actually be aligned with the people in your family who love and support you, or with God, or with, the academic goals that you've set, or the career professional goals that you set, right? And so don't rely on one domain. You should not be completely neglecting. If 20 out of 20 people don't approve of how you're being, you're probably not being a very virtuous or moral person. You're probably not being a good human being. You're not showing love. You're not showing support. You're definitely not outperforming anybody. You're not being competent with your work environment, with your schooling, whatever you're in, right? So we have to look at all these. And am I generally approved by people? Yes. Okay, cool. Then I don't need to rely all on approval of others or even one person if generally people approve me because I'm a good human. Am I healthy and do I look good? Do I feel confident if I remove the judgments of others or these images that I assume I'm supposed to look like? Yes. Okay. Physical appearance, check. We're good. Right? So diversify your sources of self-worth. They can't all come from one place. That's the most dangerous and vulnerable place you can be in, is if all your self-worth and self-esteem is wrapped up into one thing, right? Especially if you accomplish that thing, because you're not going to be happy. And then it just comes shattering down on you. And then the last thing, step 4, is set intrinsic goals. This is, setting standards for each domain. And so if we go back to when I said the I.D.D.D, identify personal contingencies, diversify sources of self-worth, develop non-contingent self-esteem, which I just covered, and then determine and achieve intrinsic goals. So we want to determine and achieve intrinsic goals. And I say achieve because when you achieve it, you have the proof. When you determine the goal, it sets you in a direction, right? Again, if we have the domains of approval, physical appearance, outperforming others, academic competence, or I would say professional competence and growth, family love and support, being a virtuous and moral person, God's love, we have all these domains. We need to set a goal because it points us in the right direction. Because just going in the right direction and working on ourselves develops more self-worth, because we see ourselves getting better and we see ourselves accepting where we're at and embarking on the challenge, choosing hard and deciding to grow. That increases self-worth. If you just do one thing and you just decide that you're going to head in the right direction and you're going to work on yourself, you will immediately improve your self-worth and value as a human being. I promise. Then we want to achieve the thing. We don't want to just determine what our goal is and the path we're going to take. We want to achieve stuff, because once you achieve it, that's how you have proof that you are capable. And when you are capable, you gain more self-respect. Plain and simple. And you gain more self-belief, which allows you way more confidence, gives you way more confidence and motivation to set the next goal and keep moving forward, because self-belief is literally confidence to keep swinging and taking action. Okay, so really, really simple here, guys. Number 1, identify personal contingencies. Number 2, develop non-contingent self-esteem. 3, diversify sources of self-worth. And number 4, determine and achieve intrinsic goals. These are intrinsic goals because they are goals that matter to you internally. They are not based on others. Self-esteem and self-worth is at an all-time low in the world, and there's a lot of reasons for it, but I hope and pray that this podcast gave you just a snapshot of what research shows to give you proof of what the facts are and what actually works to improve your self-worth and esteem, and the practical applications so you can just take it, you can run with it, and you can do it. I really hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, please leave us a 5-star rating and review. It helps us so much more than you know, and go share this with a friend who needs help in this domain, in this category as well. I appreciate you guys listening. I'll catch you next time.